Um, it's going to be an interesting session. So we have been interacting with the team from CPRG, Center for Policy and Research Group, and they have been working on this project on data donation or data daan, which we have briefly discussed at one of our meetings earlier. They have prepared a document, a draft document, which we hope to circulate, um, get feedback from external sources and in the market, and then eventually publish it as a paper. So that's what they're here to present today, to seek the first level of comments from our group, and then we put it out under our uh, various channels. So welcome, Pranav and Arjun, and it's over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. My screen is visible, right?
Yes.
So good morning, everyone. A bit about I'm Pranav Gupta. I'm a visiting fellow at Center of Policy Research and Governance. We are a Delhi-based think tank that works on various policy domains and also starting to work on tech policy now. And we've been working with various government institutions on multiple arenas in policy making and focusing on research-based work and policy evaluation. I am Pranav Gupta. I'm a visiting fellow at CPRG, and I'm also pursuing a PhD in political science at University of California, Berkeley. So when we so what so what I'm going to present today is a brief kind of a summary of the consultative paper that we are been trying to write, and one part of it really requires feedback from all of you as domain experts. So I'll just start with a brief overview of the idea and then go through the various sections, the various sections of the paper, the way it is structured right now. So data done, donate for a digital India. What's the broad objective of this exercise? The broad objective of the exercise, the problem that we are trying to focus on is poor availability of local Indian data, which affects various stakeholders. Now, various stakeholders get affected by this problem. So on one side, it's a problem for researchers and corporate India in some ways, which includes AI-based startups, etc. For them, there's a problem of lack of access to, like, they have ideas, they have ideas about solutions that they can make, they have ideas about models that they can construct, but there's a lack of availability of relevant data that they face. And on the side of government and citizens would, of course, benefit from various kinds of AI-based solutions, but the poor availability of data, which kind of leads to lack of innovation, which stems innovation, creates a lack of AI-driven based solutions, eventually also becomes a problem or matter of concern for governments and citizens. Now, what's the solution? Of course, there could be multiple solutions. One possible solution alongside this could be some sort of an initiative for data daan. Now, what do we mean by this idea of data daan? By what we mean by this idea of data daan is that perhaps there could be a nationwide program for voluntary data sharing with the stakeholders that we mentioned, private firms and researchers. Now, what this program will do is that this program will enable stakeholders to build AI-based products by accessing relevant usable, and contextually appropriate data. Now, we'll come to kind of all of these factors later on. And broadly, the objectives of this program would be primarily to ensure data availability for model training and analysis, because that's the big intervention. That's the big problem that we are focusing on, to facilitate the collection of diverse data types from various sources So when we mean data, we don't mean data just in terms of classic numeric data, quantitative numeric data. Data here could mean anything ranging from video feed, from audio clips, to actual textual material, actual printed or textual material, which would of course have to be digitalized before it can be used as data. So any source of information that can become that can contribute, that can become a part of a training data corpus becomes data for us. And the hope is that this solution, this program, or this idea kind of becomes helpful for the broader AI ML innovation ecosystem. Now I'll go over the way we have kind of structured the paper currently. So the idea is to make this as a consultative paper, wherein we first delineate potential benefits of this exercise. So we have been able to, of course, we've done background research, we've been able to talk to some various kinds of stakeholders to zero in on these concepts. So firstly, the way we have structured the paper, the idea we have put out some potential benefits that we foresee with this exercise. Second is if something like this has to be done, there have to be some basic tenets that need to be followed. These basic tenets kind of take care of various problems or various apprehensions that those who are sharing data may have, and also regulators, mighty government, etc., may have with such an exercise, considering the DPDP Act is going to be coming in, and anything that is done has to kind of be in sync with the entire regulatory framework. And finally, the idea of interface in terms of if this has to be done, if it follows various tenets, what could be the possible framework under which, through which it is done. And I think, and if you ask us personally, we feel that like this is the third part, which is kind of relatively weak at the moment, and any and all kinds of suggestions would be really helpful before we put out the consultative paper for a larger audience. So what are potential benefits? So four potential benefits that I'll discuss briefly. One, eliminating algorithm bias. Two, building sovereign AI. Three, driving an innovation-based economy, or basically innovation, or basically an ecosystem that focuses on AI ML innovation. And finally, reducing costs for a digital economy. Eliminating algorithm bias. So it's kind of accepted that that solutions or answers that are generated often depend on the underlying data. Now, if you have data which is either foreign or data which is limited, it may, of course, if you put in data, you will get some answers, you will get some conclusions, but those conclusions may be unreliable, irrespective of the quantity of data that you use. You may use a very large data set, but it may still give unreliable solutions. And AI models may end up perpetuating societal biases and stereotypes, biased algorithm. Now, if we are going to be applying these solutions to various domains, biased algorithms can have serious adverse effects. Now, now to eliminate the problem of algorithm bias, we need more and more local data. We need more and more locally sourced data. And also another thing that we have to remember is that that India in itself is such a diverse society that even in India, that even if something has to be done for India itself, even the data also has to be representative of India's own domestic diversity as well. That's one factor that needs to be kept in mind. And to eliminate algorithm bias, we need better data, we need more diverse data, and data then kind of becomes one way through which researchers and startups and the broader innovation ecosystem gets access to better data. Building sovereign AI. So now there's a lot of focus on AI sovereignty or digital sovereignty for countries. Governments are taking all kinds of steps, enhancing AI infrastructure, investing in various programs for supporting broader ecosystems, local storage of data, etc. And we know all these have strong geopolitical ramifications. But to be able to actually attain data sovereignty, to be able to actually attain some sort of digital sovereignty or push towards sovereign AI, it is not possible till we have reliance till we have external reliance for data. And external reliance for data can be of both forms. So one is that relying on data collected abroad for domestic solutions or products for the domestic market, and second is of course the idea of foreign firms owning Indian data, and then Indian ecosystem being dependent on these foreign firms for data collected within India itself. Driving innovation-based economy. Now, driving innovation-based economy, what we feel, of course, there's no, and this group, and in this group, we don't have to emphasize the kind of power that AI and ML-based solutions hold for a broad range of domains. But the idea here is to focus on that data sharing or some sort of a mechanism for creating or building access to better data became source of innovation globally. And these are some of the examples that we want to highlight in the consultative papers. And the objective is basically that anybody who reads the paper kind of understands why these are things that are, one, these are important. Two, this idea is not something which is this idea is not something which is entirely new, in the sense that there have been some similar past precedents globally that this idea is similar to. So, for example, in US, there was a whole lack of DNA data. Accessing DNA data was required an extremely long and complicated process, and all of this changed when the government launched the Human Genome Project, and the Human Genome Project led to better access of data, and that became the backbone for innovation across the industry. And this and similar arrangements have had serious implications in public health. For example, even development of the coronavirus vaccine involved data sharing arrangements. Now, how is this done? No. This is not something which is being done in various ways. So in London, in UK, for instance, Transport for London, the nodal transport authority in London, public makes massive data sets that it collects, so public transportation data that it manages to collect through operations, available free of charge. Now, once this data is available publicly, it becomes it managed to it ended up enabling an entire innovation ecosystem around it, and it's estimated currently around 600 apps are using TFL's data sets. Now, this this is another kind of an example wherein, and this is a real-time example in the sense that these are data sets which are being, of course, because of TFL operations are going on continuously. So these data sets are being updated, and new data is being repeatedly put out there for use. So this is the other idea of government, why government putting up real-time data, government putting up data that it collects as part of everyday operations, or if it puts this data out, or if it allows sharing of this data beyond kind of special arrangements that some individuals or firms are able to get with the government, how that kind of creates an entire innovation ecosystem. Now, it's not that something like this, that there have been some limited efforts in India as well. So, for example, the Bhashini program, which focuses on improving access to content and improving access to content in local languages. So here again, the government, now what that requires is again massive training corpus to train models on local languages, to train models on translation. Now here again, the government kind of acts as a facilitator, where the government manages to create an open source repository, validated and standardized, provides access. Now, Kumbh Mela in 2019, L&T, which was responsible for some civil work, managed to also leverage AI-based technologies to efficiently manage the 250 million pilgrims that attended the Kumbh Mela. Now there's another thing that we must remember, that when we talk about data sets, or when we talk about source of data, we are not talking about just the government as a source of data. So when we think of sources of data, the government is just one of the many sources of data, which is why when we think of data Daan as an idea, it is not an idea which is focused on just how to ensure that the government shares all the data that it is building, that the government shares all the data that it is collecting. That's just one element, or that's just one aspect of this, that could be one aspect of this broader initiative that focuses on getting data through as many sources as possible. And at the micro level, at the root level, it could even, if you're able to create create an appropriate framework and solution for this, then at the root it could actually mean individuals coming out and voluntarily sharing their data to power to facilitate innovation. Now, as I said, as I said, of course, none of this would be new knowledge for this group, but these are some of the, but when we put it out for wider consultation, these are some of the benefits that we want to highlight when it comes to driving AI-based innovation. It encourages new product development, helps private entities identify underserved markets and market segments, support development of targeted products, empowers problem solving, which is unique to India, which is unique to Indian context, and expands companies' customer base, which essentially helps the economy. Now, reducing costs for a digital economy. So we know that centralization of AI through monopolization of useful data sets by early movers is a major problem, and which is why data collection, cleaning, labeling, and making the data usable becomes prohibitive, because that's a costly, that is something which is extremely, that could potentially be extremely costly, and that automatically creates high entry barriers for startups, and for researchers often these costs are beyond reach. So which is why if there is a voluntary data sharing framework, and alongside, of course, there are initiatives, there are ways and potentially AI based solutions themselves to make the data usable, to, because there's one part which is in terms of collecting the data, and and it's a different part altogether to make that data compatible and make that data usable. Now, if that is done, that really reduces costs for various startups and research in AI ML space. So these were kind of the broad benefits that we thought we should be highlighting in the paper. So the paper kind of begins with these benefits, sets up why an exercise like this needs to be done, of course, and alongside we also have some examples of why this is an issue, why poor availability of data is an issue. Then comes to some sort of tenets of data Daan. Like what are various ideas that data Daan will entail, will ensure? So the three kind of broad tenets that we identified. One is trust. It has to maintain trust. Privacy, which is a major concern when it comes to data security. And finally, democratization of access to data, because that is in some ways one of the core elements of why this entire exercise is being done, and which is why that has to be ensured, that one has to ensure that that remains a strong aspect, an important aspect of the eventual framework, whatever that may be. Now, trust. Now, when it comes to trust, this is important because we have the various aspects that need to be taken care of. One is consent. Now, why consent is extremely important is, among other reasons, among also normative reasons, any such exercise has to be in sync with the regulatory framework. So any framework for this voluntary data sharing will have to involve some element of consent, because that would be important for keeping it in sync, keeping it in compliance with the DPDP Act. Now, data breach, again, something that needs to be taken care of. There is a possibility of data, of course, there's a possibility of a data breach occurring. So all sorts of steps must be taken to limit any possibility of data breach. Now, purpose. Now, why purpose is extremely important is because when we are framing this exercise, the broad idea of this exercise is that it helps an innovation ecosystem. Now, if it helps an innovation ecosystem, anybody sharing data, a large number of people sharing data, may be sharing it with some trust or with some element of expectation that the data is used for certain purposes, for certain legitimate purposes, for certain purposes that they may relate to. So, which is why there may be some need for some sort of prior deck. So, if any user kind of intends to use the data, or can there be ways of ensuring that the user has to, one, of course, declare the use or purpose of using the data prior to accessing it, and two, can there be an element wherein an individual may be able to approve use of his or her data based on the predefined purpose that the user is declaring. Grievances, of course, any kind of interface will have, there may be issues, so who kind of deals with these issues? And then in terms of, and then in terms of best practices, which are standardized, which are standardized and ensure kind of transparency. So, for example, the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, again has a platform where it puts out a lot of data. And here there's a very clear list of charges. And of course, these are things which are happening in India as well. So now most of the micro data that the government collects through the National Sample Survey and various surveys is all basically put online on a government on a government portal, and data is accessible for all for free of cost. Second, as I again mentioned, privacy remains important. Now, privacy by design and anonymity by design, both are important principles that need to be kept in mind while focusing on what the actual mechanics or framework for something like this could be. So one, of course, ensuring privacy as a core principle for all stakeholders. We have to integrate privacy considerations have to be integrated across the data processing across the entire process. It's not something that has to be done only at one stage. And thirdly, ensuring personally identifiable information across the data value chain is protected. And in that sense, there could also be a question of whether something like this, when the focus is just on training models, is personal identifiable information even relevant, or can this be done without any kind of personal identifiers? Anonymity by design. So ensuring individuals remain unidentifiable unless there is voluntary disclosure, implement safeguards to prevent individuals' direct identification, and respect privacy preferences and enhance data anonymity. But again, the idea that if the focus or the big objective is training of models, how much does like can there be complete data anonymity? Like if there is no data anonymity, what does that get? Like how does that even help? Now, democratization of access to data, to discarding a cookie cutter approach, aspects of DP Act when applied uniformly, so impact sectors, and it impacts various sectors. So which is why we may have to think of, and this is just an idea, that can there actually be a universal policy when it comes to access of this data through this platform, or will we need to think of sector specific rules? Second is creating repositories. So there's an idea of some sort of shared data, and shared data has to be standardized and accessible. And the idea, and then within that, can there be some sort of an identification of data sets of national importance, which become important data that the government kind of prioritizes while sharing? Ease of access. So all things, whatever platform is created, we have to ensure that we have to ideally ensure that the process for both accessing data and submitting data is easy. Because if the format or the process for submitting data or sharing data is not easy at all, there hardly anyways, there are, because it's a voluntary exercise, there are no commercial or monetary incentives for individuals or firms holding data to share anything. So which is why the process has to be seamless and easy for them. And similarly, even for users, ideally the process should be as easy as possible. Like there should be, like this should not be another example of red tapeism occurring and create and there being sharp regulatory barriers to accessing data from whatever framework. Now there are various. Now coming to the final segment, which is in terms of how or what could this framework look like in practice. Now there's some best practices or cases that we could rely on. So one is, can there be some learnings or can there be some application of the backend protocol which underlies the ONDC? Can that be used? Because here again, there's an idea, like if we think of this in terms of a, like not exactly, of course, but there's again some element of, if we can think of data providers as sellers and data users as buyers, there is some sort of an exchange happening and there's some sort of a buyer-seller framework that may exist even under this. And then data marketplace using DEPA principles, that can we think of the, like, how can we think of this entire ecosystem? Now, defining an interface. Now, of course, as I've been saying repeatedly, data then will require an interface for voluntary data sharing, right? This can't be, or possible, or should this just be an individual voluntary exercise where this can't be an individual voluntary exercise where individuals companies can directly contact individuals, ask them for data, because then the level at which crowdsourcing will happen is going to be massive. Like that's not something that may be feasible. So there will have to be some interface, some portal that kind of facilitates this. Now the problem, now there are various pros and cons with each model. Now one is, can there be a government portal wherein the government basically becomes the intermediary connecting data providers and data users? So now for a lot of people, the presence of the government as kind of a third party in this arrangement increases transparency, ensures legal compliance to certain norms. And of course, governments themselves uh, are potentially going to be important data providers in this. So that also ensures that the government remains an active stakeholder, because governments themselves may be reluctant to share their data on a portal or an interface which is entirely private. So having a government-based portal or interface also ensures participation of the government or through the same mechanism. Then there's a platform-based model, which of course enables swift transactions. We had various solutions for ensuring compliance with the principles tenets that we just identified. So for example, can there be blockchain-driven auditable trails for just tracking who uses which data, who's using his data? Can we think of blockchain-based solutions? And then there's also an idea of something like a confidential clean room, wherein training of models essentially happens in this confidential clean room where nobody knows who is giving the data and who is using it, and the data is used, and the data is used without any kind of real transfer of data between any party, which ensures compliance with various tenets. So these are some of the initial ideas that we have in terms of how this exercise would be structured, how the framework would be structured, and we would like your suggestions on this and even other aspects of the paper, and also if you think, like we've kind of structured the paper around, we've structured the document around these three broad sections, but if you think there should be a fourth section or a fifth section, like that's also something that we would love to hear and get your feedback on. Thank you.
Pranav, you had some discussions, right, with different stakeholders. Can you share some of the insights you got from those discussions?
Yes, absolutely. We can share. So Arjun, can you talk briefly about some of the discussions that we had with some of the stakeholders and how some of the findings or some of the things that we've put out in the paper have come from our interactions with various stakeholders?
Sure, absolutely. A couple of things straight on the top of my head that comes is, firstly, there was the idea of bias whenever we speak of algorithmic bias. our research suggested that to a very large extent, it's a very neat picture, very black and white picture, but through more conversations around data entrepreneurs, we realized that there's more to the algorithm, the bias argument, where they spoke that to some extent, when we talk about internally as a demography, as a population pool, bias is welcome. We cannot use, say, a data set of West Bengal in Tamil Nadu, things like that. That's something that we have acknowledged, and uh, that's something that informed our document. The other aspect is around the technical aspects around the interface, the idea of, say, a confidential clean room, and the idea of how data needs to, anonymity needs to be prepared across the transfer of data. The idea of PII and how it is actually used when some major data collecting company goes about it, how that process looks like. So those were aspects that have been used. From the researcher's perspective, we realized what a lack of good and adequate data means, how researchers are themselves overcoming the problem, and what all do they expect the government and even the people to do. In fact, when we talk about data Daan, as Pranav sir mentioned, that it's not a new idea. It's been there globally and in India to some extent. Many researchers are in fact using some sort of voluntary data sharing, voluntary data donation ideas as well, where they're creating their own data sets and even sharing it with other researchers using different licenses. So those were some of the ideas that we have used. Pranav sir, if I missed something, please.
No, thank you.
Great. Should we then perhaps open the floor for any suggestions and comments and feedback that we might have?
Yeah. Hi, Pranav, Arjun. Thanks for the presentation. It's a very good idea, and I think it's about time that as a country we think about having all these shared data sets, which researchers can use and which can be made available commercially as well. See, one of the thoughts I have is getting commercial parties to disclose that or to donate their data without any clear commercial benefits will be difficult, because these are companies which have boards and which have shareholders, and they ask questions, right? Data is the new oil, and everything is all well known by everyone. So they will not donate their data without there being a clear quid pro quo. And I'm using a very crude word here because that's how the commercial world works, right? If you give something of value, you expect something back. Otherwise, their board will question them, saying, what made you give this important resource away to your competitors and to the outer world who can make commercial products out of it? So there has to be a clear commercial model for some of this. Otherwise, it'll remain as something which is enforced on government entities, and from the top, the government will say, okay, you have to share data, therefore they will share data. Commercial entities will not step forward unless the benefit to them is clear. Like, for example, one model could be you set up a data clean room, create an industry, industry-wide, in a particular industry, an industry-wide initiative saying, if you donate your data, then you get access to all the models that are created in the clean room. And parties from outside who want to create models have to come to the clean room, submit their code. That clean room executes the models, and those models, the state-of-the-art models, are available to everyone who contributed data beyond a certain extent, right? I mean, not just nominal data, but substantial data. So that, I think, has to be thought through. Otherwise, what will happen is, as I said, it'll remain a government initiative because people don't want to donate data without clear commercial benefit, and they will not, because their boards will hold them accountable, right? They'll say, for what reason did you donate resources? Or it has to be structured as some part of some CSR initiative, which is industry-wide. Take up one industry after the other and say, guys, this is an industry-wide initiative. Notionally, this is of value X. And the government says, okay, since this is part of CSR, you are allowed to show this as part of your CSR expenses or something like that. And then people will step forward.
Yeah, yes, sir, absolutely. So which is why, and maybe we should stress this more. I think one, this is an exercise which is essentially which we envisage as a voluntary initiative wherein sharing is voluntary. Like this is not something which is like the government. The idea is not to urge the government to come out with some regulations for firms to make their data to share their data. Two, you're absolutely right. For firms, there have to be clear incentives for them to share the data, and merely some sort of voluntary exercise driving innovation would not be enough, which is why the prime focus in terms of who we envisage as parties or stakeholders, parties sharing data in this case would basically be private individuals or organized private individuals or societies, like for example, apartment societies sharing CCTV data feed. So more in terms of private individuals and private individuals in their individual capacity or groups of individuals or the government. Firms, especially private firms would kind of be the least likely candidate among all of these who would be sharing data. In terms of private firms, we are thinking them more primarily as users of users of data.
Okay.
Yes, just adding on to what Pranav said, one of the understandings we built through those interviews was that perhaps there is some creation of local data, but that access remains limited to your Gamma companies. Companies will not be willing to interact with Indian startups, Indian researchers. So that is something that we're also trying to counter.
I want to add a perspective as well. The starting point was deliberately data Daan, data donation. And therefore, the idea was that from a nation building perspective, building highly relevant and accurate models for India with Indian data is important, and which is why this call for donating whatever data people may have access to. We have discussed the issue of also paying for data, and at some stage we want to build a framework where people can host data free of cost or paid. One of the challenges of paid is, of course, it adds complexity to how the data is going to be shared. But how do you price data? Because everybody perceives the value of their data to be a lot higher than the real value. Therefore, how do you arrive at that? There are so many companies purporting to be, data companies, and yet they haven't been able to extract much value from the data they have. So some of those we will learn as we go along. And therefore, initially the idea was just whatever you think you can just voluntarily contribute free of cost, you do that, you donate it to us. It's a good suggestion you have, Raj, that maybe it can be considered under CSR. So we will explore that and see how that can be done. But again, it goes back to how do you ascribe a value? What value are you ascribing, and therefore what is the CSR benefit they will get? So those are some of the questions we will have to answer.
Sapan Shah here. I am CTO at Measure One. We are on the principles of consumer permission data. Our entire company works on that, primarily US focused. So one of the challenges that may come up with respect to consent is number one, awareness. It's been a journey where consumers are not aware as to what consumer permission data means, especially in a geography like India, where there is large amount of population in rural areas. So if you're looking at personalized individual data, creating awareness around that might become a challenge. I'm not sure how do we handle that.
Hi, this is Santosh here. Just one point.
Yes.
The the data repository, right? What is getting created through data, then it's actually like a blood bank, right?
Yeah.
You know, and the thing is that if I'm interested in donating my blood, the custodian out there would check my blood, ensure that that is good, and it will not spoil the rest of the stuff which is stored there, right? So how do you ensure that the data that is getting collected, or somebody voluntarily submitting their data, how clean that data is, and would that create unnecessary biases, as you said, because the data is not clean? Yeah, so primarily the framework to ensure that the data that is coming in is clean.
Sure.
Yeah,
Maybe.
and I think
Yeah.
when it comes to, I think ensuring that the data is clean at source, I think might be hard, because at some level we are thinking about private individuals sharing the data, and again, because it's a voluntary exercise, they may have few incentives to kind of ensure compliance with whatever norms that one creates for them, and that can of course be reinforced, and one can ensure that it's as clean as possible. But eventually the platform the platform would need to have some ways of ensuring data cleaning and also filtering based on data.
All right. Okay.
Right. There are a couple of
Rather than
common
having
questions.
So just to finish that point, I
Yeah.
think some of these details are going to be worked out, and that's one of the objectives of putting out the paper for consultations. And over a period of time, we want to invite people who have expertise in managing the mechanism of sharing the data, ensuring that the quality of data is good. We're also looking at maybe incorporating blockchain security and tracing of data, how it is being used, etc. So those are things to evolve, and therefore we invite all the help and suggestions which people in the group have.
Sure.
So anybody who has expertise in that, more than welcome to join hands.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks.
Sure. There are a couple of comments in the chat box. Perhaps we can take those up. I think Kaushiki sir is asking about consent in the case of RWS, and Adarsh sir is asking about policy being implemented in retrospective. I'm not sure if so in any case, we are always talking about consent, even in the case of RWAs, or whether it's some sort of collective. Consent remains one of the priorities throughout, which is something that all of us here would agree. I don't think without consent anything would work. But yes, but I think Pranav sir would like to add to that.
And also I think, like, of course, RWS cannot just share data without taking consent from all members, but then that's an exercise that they will have to do at their end, in the sense that if we have these cameras installed, do we have some sort of a collective consent that this feed can be shared with X, Y, Z actors? And of course, this is not something which can be implemented retrospectively, and which is why there is no idea of anything like enforcement here. This is a voluntary exercise, and at some level, once there is an arrangement with a few organizations, a few bodies, that automatically creates a ripple effect, that automatically could possibly create a domino effect wherein others could also be encouraged to join in. So the first move will of course take more convincing, will it be hard to convince them to do so. But once that happens and there is some merit that people see in the exercise, others would be relatively easier to bring on board.
Pranav, one thing which might help in your paper is to give some examples so as to figure out how it will play out, right? For example, let's say the state government wants to donate healthcare data, public healthcare records, right? So what does that mean? So will it mean that each citizen has to approve that? Or will it mean that everything will get masked, citizen details will be removed? and then it'll get uploaded. So we just probably need to get into the next level of details as to the implications of a decision like that, and because it'll conflict with citizen things also, right? So how do we? So maybe with some examples, I think it'll really help. Healthcare data is of great value. A lot of things can be done if that healthcare data is available. But you're going to run into this issue of privacy and data concerns. So how, for example, can a state government donate the data without any issue?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Like, and healthcare is the one which is relatively tricky because while they have all the data now, the way they have structured the digital dashboards and the backend system under Ayushman Bharat, now most things are digitized, including like an Anganwadi worker going to a household and conducting basic tests like that. At the back end, all data exists, and it exists at the actual micro level, like household, individual level. And healthcare, yes, there's a big question of what can the government share and how it can be shared. But for various other things, the government is already putting out a lot of information. So information in that case, it's just about making it more usable and perhaps putting it in one place. So for instance, welfare programs. So who benefits from welfare programs? Actual names of beneficiaries are already available at the individual level on many welfare program dashboards, and that's part of a transparency exercise so that anybody can kind of collectively monitor the implementation of these schemes. So it's not that the government has disclosed this by chance or this is an error of omission. This is something that the government does as a best practice to ensure accountability. Now, those are things wherein it can just be consolidated and put in one place for easier use. So yes, even within the government data, there would be some variation.
Yeah, hi, this is Rajesh here. I have a few points with respect to from a application standpoint. Somewhere I feel that we'll have to go a little bit sector specific and use cases. Because even I think there is I mean there are many suggestions around why India should take a use case approach to AI. Use case approach might be more beneficial because that gives us some kind of a direction in terms of what data we want in what sectors. Rather than this becoming a dump or a repository of all kinds of data, a use case led, in specific sectors like healthcare will drive what kind of validations, processing needs to be done. That way, like, Santosh pointed out, even Gopal pointed out about the need for processing it and making sure it is in the right shape for model development, right? So that I think maybe it may be worthwhile to think about that. That also helps us to align and prioritize those kinds of impact that we really want to create in specific sectors, right? So that is one thing. And second is I in the how part, you've called out DEPA and Beacon. There is also this DEPA training. There is they have uh, a repository. I mean, the DEPA training framework is exclusive to these collecting data for training, AI model training. And they go into talking about why some of the things like consent based, which works for specific data collection, for specific use cases. It may not work for collecting training data because of many issues, because this the data that you collect will be used over a period of time. You could be doing some aggregation on top of that. So there are many issues, and one cannot take a fine-grained consent for data, right? And then they go on to propose some things around de-identification, the use of differential privacy, and of course clean data rooms. So I'm thinking that maybe to build trust among the people, like, corporates or anyone who's willing to donate, I think it is important to go with some sound framework, as a that underpins our approach, right? And DEPA training may be the thing. I've not come across anything that is a good alternative. So that may be, worth considering a little bit more. And I think there's sufficient information. There's even a reference implementation that they have given, although it may be very narrow and may not be something that we are looking for. But it could definitely be a starting point, and we could possibly reach out to some of the folks in the iSpirit foundation to help us with understanding it a little better, wherever it is required. And then finally, I mean, I feel that what we are trying to create here with Data Daan is essentially more like a open digital platform where consumers who are looking for data for their models, and data providers, it could be individuals, it could be private organizations or governments willing to donate. And the idea of an open digital system, and including backend, at some point, maybe not immediately, but at some point when the exchanges between the consumers and the data providers become standardized, backend can be looked at to automate many of the things. But until then, I think, I mean, maybe, it might be, worthwhile to think about, calling it something more like a, data collective for good, or something, rather than Data Daan. I'm just thinking that, maybe, looking at the larger, public good, or, that sort of a thing, it may be worthwhile to think of, something that is representative of the broader good that it can create, not just in the societal point of view, but also in the private sector, depending on what sector we are focusing. So those are the 3 points that I wanted to share.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we'll incorporate all of these.
Cool. I think there are no further questions. We can wrap it up. Great. Thanks, Pranav, Arjun, Ramananji, for your effort. I think, Alok, you want to add anything to close it?
No, that's it. Thank you, CPRG team, and thanks everyone for attending. I think we have had one of the highest attendance today in many Fridays, so which is good. So this is a paper. I think after this discussion, we'll probably start taking it public from next week onwards. Start collecting all the feedback, and then formalize it as a paper.